Hello everyone, today we talk about historical reliability, accuracy, and ideology as a guide for those followers that feel confused about the difference or the congruence of these elements and wonder where I stand on that. I actually didn't want to make this video only because it sounds repetitive in the title, right? The content is slightly different from what we have discussed. Of course, these are topics that I have already addressed on multiple occasions. Again, if anyone's interested in my sort of worldview and approach to history, there is the Historian playlist that is essentially a guide to my content, my historical content, which I think the channel fundamentally revolves around. I don't think that I'm here to specifically do anything else so far than historical disclosure. And of course criticism, and of course in that sense ideology, but the latter term apparently creates the greatest confusion whenever it's thrown around, because generally, and I have had this also among my some of my commentators that at some point said, well, you know what, you changed my mind about this. In fact, mostly think that ideology simply means that you have a prefixed doctrine that you must impose prejudicially and essentially lying and to anyone and rigging your even historical interpretation, whatever. And I'm very sensitive to historical accuracy, specifically because that's what I do. Just today I've been coping with peer reviews, corrections, whatever, on an article I'm writing, and I realize every time I sit here to make the video that, of course, it is true that I don't show you essentially what my work really is. You do not know who I am, largely. I also don't talk much about myself, if not in function to the channel, what I say on the channel, and so on. So, of course, I have long-term plans for Schwerpunkt. Maybe YouTube will become obsolete in some year, and this will go somewhere else, etc. But I like doing what I do, even if I'm not like a viral channel content maker. But I am definitely satisfied with how it's going, because I enjoy the process. I learn a lot of stuff myself every day, and so over time I noticed that this affected, even positively, my professional performance, and vice versa, of course, because we never stop growing, hopefully. And when I sit here and I get certain impressions also from the broader internet, as you know, I have been commenting on some Reddit discussions on my channel, all this stuff, I realized that it's as if there were two distant universes, right, almost quasi-independent from each other, that do not communicate. That's an impression, of course, I received from my academic background, which is obvious, right? An article that I write, even as open source for everyone to read, will not be read by if not by a minimum fraction of a YouTube video that, you know, of the larger channels and so on. And so avoiding to discuss specifically what I think is the future of academia, and there are lots of things going on. As you know, the world is really taking a strange turn and everything is very critical, but that's also why I'm confident that speaking about this stuff and at different levels can be useful. I realize that, of course, it's difficult to present people with some type of work. I plan even to make videos about, say, straight from my articles, the ones at least that I can, that are open source, at least I can reference, like for the sake of any legal nuisance possibility, but that of course are mine. I can do whatever I want with, but that's not really the point. The point being mostly, and that's what I do on here, because in an academic background you don't need that, at least you have other standards for which you don't need to make these explanations, but the other world doesn't. know that, right? And this is a huge problem because the majority doesn't know that. And everything concerning, even this historical disclosure like the one I can make, gets often chewed, spit, like redrawn, reframed, whatever. And the thing that, say, surprised me the most, or at least impressed me to some degree, is that of all the topics that I discuss every day, right? I think I made almost 2,000 videos on here. The substratum of internet debate revolving around my channel has nothing to do with any historical content. It has to do, first of all, with my ideology, and I can understand that because, of course, you want to know what this guy is thinking. But the second is also the problem posed by the fact that, yes, I can sit here every single day and telling things the way I want, and I will explain why I say I tell them the way I want and what is this way. Of course, recently I made a video that was along the a line of like what's Schwerpunkt ideology, which was not actually answering nor planning to answer the question because I've never done it. But it's very interesting because, again, after 2,000 videos, you understand it's difficult still to get where I want to get, but still, and that's planned, that's wanted by me. But at the same time, this ideology apparently creates some sort of panic, or at least some distrust, not to exceed, but sometimes it gets down that in some sort of malaise for which it's as if people wouldn't accept that there is a way of interpreting history, that history is basically and exclusively about that, and that someone that at least presents himself as a PhD and everything, and I haven't showed you the paper of that, so you can't even legitimately doubt of that. Let's say maybe not legitimately, but at least you may have a motivation for thinking so, in spite of the things I discussed from that doctoral adventure. But that the problem doesn't stand in fact in what I say, but the fact that apparently people don't understand or do not have the time to inquire, or are feel threatened by for some reason, and specifically lack of citations, specifically also this admission that, of course, I don't consider any sane person using a YouTube video for a scientific work, and that still things I say, of course, however, in spite of this kind of suspicions, are actually accurate, right? And that this shouldn't at least be so strange, at least if you have the adequate expertise to evaluate this content. In the opposite case, of course, not realizing that, and at that point being more your problem than my problem. For which reason? Well, because by relative standards, it's pretty evident that the degree of historical depth of my videos is maybe just a little bit above the average, and if you are satisfied with other content, you may really want to check what your criteria are, right? This is not to say that you must follow my videos, not at all, I don't care. I've always said that Schwerpunkt's content is specifically just for a few people, and that even if one just followed it, I would be satisfied, because it's really what I truly mean, that if understood, it's worth it. If it's not understood, it's, again, the other person's problem. It's also my problem if I fail in deliverance. But I think that my historical content is definitely one that you may not want to miss if you have at least any interest in this sort of YouTube history community. And then there can be, of course, other reasons for which you watch me. So this is the background to this video, which is going to be very simple, because I'm going to explain what are the logical connections between things like reliability, accuracy, and ideology, what they actually mean in any context, really, but even more so this circumstance. for the aforementioned, for the sake of the aforementioned topics, right? So there is obviously a difference between the two things. The three things, of course, the first two, as they are interdependent, and ideology having to do mostly with, in fact, the way you build up the kind of information that may be not reliable for, we'll see for which reason, but that still may be quite accurate. And this is yet another confusion. I don't know if I may just making an experiment and asking what's the difference between reliability and accuracy, how many people would actually be able to, first of all, to know the correct etymology and meaning of the words, but in that sense also drawing kind of the difference. Because we are sort of, we are skipping a passage here, right? Because reliability is independent from accuracy, right? You can have, of course, a forgery, in which case maybe someone spends himself so much to make up a sort of an alternative scenario that eventually may even be plausible, but not really finding match with the reality. There are many of these things that it's particularly difficult to do so, because for the more you distance yourself from reality or hide from it, and so the least relevant that information is going to be, right? You can have, and this happens all the time, accurate accounts that are sort of, let's say, maybe snubbed and or just in a very large group that, in fact, you don't have the time to browse in order to understand what to pick and what not, right? And so you may miss a Stradivari among, an immense pile of violins, right, and not really caring about that. So in this sense, and as I was saying in the beginning, the problem is not the it doesn't, at least the problem concerns specifically the person that needs or doesn't this piece of information to be reliable, right? It may be that, of course, if you as a maker of that content want to be reliable and say known for reliability, you will occupy yourself with being reliable and presenting your data in a way that, of course, tranquil, like satisfies the person that, however, has the searcher, let's say, that however has his or own standard. So those are not necessarily your own. So you can actually be talking about extremely even reliable things, but the average person not necessarily having the capacity to distinguish whether it's reliable or not. It can be a problem. Accuracy partly has to do with the reliability, again, in as much competent people, and competent people only, are able to understand the same accuracy of the information, right? When a person complains that something is not reliable, either has is not expressing a judgment of merit, of quality on the accuracy, right? He's simply admitting that she is not able to understand whether this thing is accurate, is reliable or not, and implicitly is declaring that the criteria of accuracy, correctness of that historical information are beyond his or her intellectual capacity to sort out. In other words, again, if you are particularly ignorant in a topic and somebody gives you an information, there is no merit really in not being able to distinguish whether that thing is reliable or not as an information. Because if you're thinking that, you're not even entering your own autonomy in the analysis of the accuracy, because you do not know what we're talking about. In history, things get trickier, and I will avoid to discuss this specifically because this would only increase the paranoia of those who cannot distinguish whether content for its reliability autonomously. but let's say, in a certain way, I understand perfectly that history, as other fields, is somehow trickier for those who do not know much better, because history, differently from, say, hard sciences that are not necessarily more intelligent or easier for achieving practical, use for reality, and so, speaking of handling accuracy of complex systems, is of course subject to some stimulations, let's say, that we receive constantly, and that exactly because they, say, can't simply be fixed, because they're moral forces fundamentally, they're moral dimensions that you cannot materially measure, right? And as a consequence, the impression, actually the impression mostly is opposite. Like, at least those who are not historically competent tend to think that there is some sort of a gold standard of history for which there are some books, scholars, that whatever they say is an absolute and it's correct. History is none of this. It's never been that, right? There is a greater and lesser accuracy, and this is what we strive constantly, but by definition, there is nothing more morally and scientifically illiterate to presume that what we do as historians has anything to do with that, right? Which is not an excuse for moral relativism. It's completely the opposite, right? Most history, most certified history, and I tell you as an insider, has barely anything to do with that, right? It is a product. It's a sort of a Marxist would say a superstructure, right? That, of course, doesn't mean anything just per se, but it's something that floats above what most people really can see, even just about reality, of course, without understanding it, but not having, in fact, that capacity to understand that what are the things that stays above, that they will treat passively as a superstition, has actually any validity, because they do not have the tools to actually understand that on their own, right? So it falls back to what I was saying before. Let's stop pretending that if somebody is not capable in doing something, that can somehow be bypassed magically, because a lot of, unfortunately, of our, at least especially my generation's education was starting being based on this sense, that there is nothing that you can do without doing anything in order to earn it, though, right? So the lacking, essentially, it's a sort of narcissistic disorder. It's pretending that you must be given something just because you breathe, that you must achieve without spitting blood and sweat and tears. And so this is the only thing I see whenever I still find people that are somehow strangely obsessed with the prequel, let's say, not even entering the actual question, but, starting to wonder whether they should even be listening to this in the first place, bailing out of their own, of any moral or intellectual responsibility concerning the way they should be able, as adults, mature people, to be able to evaluate by themselves. And again, it's perfectly understandable because we're all gravely ignorant in something. I'm not going out there and saying, well, I'm such an expert in engineering, I can tell you whatever it is because, I know better. Of course, you do not know what I've done in my life, so you may think that I'm not even a historian or that I'm here just for some other reason. But a colleague would recognize that that's not quite the case. And that the validity of a statement can be measured also without a bibliography, for example. The reliability of a point of reference. Actually, chances are that person would know and understand where you get the thing from, and of course wouldn't see anything wrong even with a simple explanation like I do. For example, on Schwerpunkt, that can seem the single most in-depth thing that exists on YouTube at this level repeatedly, right? Because every video I've made is fundamentally with this. And that if someone is not habituated to, because has literally no clue that this is possible if you just study even not that too long, right? Like an entire life, but just, a decade or a bit more, is quite easily feasible also on the grounds of very solid historical accuracy, which is part of the reason why, for example, first of all, I don't have the time in the first place even to cite, to have a bibliography, whatever, because also 95% what I say is I'm just inventing from my mind, inventing literally in the etymological sense of the word. It means to fish out of a pool that you have actually accumulated. Doesn't mean making up. And that I am, of course, free to discuss whichever way pleases me, right? First of all, I'm quite happy when I can cite, quote, whatever. I routinely do it. But I'm, of course, not here to give any satisfaction to any person who pretends that they have to be reliable for making up to their own deficiencies. That's definitely something I'm very sensitive to. And I enjoy doing that, by the way. What I also enjoy is striving for objectivity and accuracy. Now, let's take a look and see what a definition of reliability is. The first one, right? There are different, say, semantics that we will see partly. Of course, every dictionary can phrase things in a different way, but let's put it in this way. Let's see some facets of it. The quality of being trustworthy or of performing consistently well. Right now, this is very strange because if you put the issue on a matter of trust, you may fall back into the question of, but is this person really, like, you're skipping the problem. You know, you're not explaining how you can gain that reliability, trustworthiness, right? So I don't like this definition at all. Also, performing consistently well, yes, but on the basis of what? What objective? You see here, the relativism of the world we live in, right? Reliability doesn't seem here even employed linguistically in the most common sense as what the true meaning should be about. And in fact, there is a much better definition that sounds like reliability is the degree to which the result of a measurement, calculation, or specification can be dependent on to be accurate, right? And this is also interesting because to be dependent on basically means to be controlled or determined by, right? So this means that once you're entering in the accuracy field, right? So you acquire reliability once you have demonstrated to be accurate, right? And so here the step is finally taken, the ignorance is dissipated, and therefore people can see that you're accurate or inaccurate. Hence, again, it's not, there is nothing to be proud of in being in that wandering question, because it means that either you have still to address the subject, in any case you do not still know what that is, and if you consume it but without realizing whether this is reliable or not, it's you who has a problem, and also should ask yourself why you are actually consuming this. If for some reason it's a problem for you to be unreliable. This is not to say that we have to blame anyone for not being fully able to understand that, but we should be, let's say, wary of, as people wondering on that reliability, how concerning our behavior towards the source, right? Because if you claim that a source is unreliable for some sort of reputation that eludes from the actual accuracy of the content, well, you're actually making a disservice, first of all, to yourself and also to the source, which, if accurate, however, is going to easily break through, right? So this step is actually crucial, and nobody seems to be aware of this. So the picture here would be that how reliable is a source on the basis of what? Of somebody else saying that it's reliable, or some criterion that you cannot determine, or because it seems that you actually have the capacity to determine that it's unreliable. I can watch any YouTube history video and immediately telling you whether that's accurate or inaccurate, and therefore, on the base of that, whether it's a reliable or unreliable source. Because I can easily point out where the information is taken from, how the person that is pouring it is understanding that, or where do they come from with that, if they're sort of criticizing it, if they're expressing some opinion on it. And so if they're objective, whatever, it's my job, right? I have to control that to be the case, because if I don't get where I want to go, like academically speaking. So at that point, certain criteria, scientific criteria, would not be met, and I wouldn't be published in all this stuff, right? On YouTube, naturally, there is no such thing. There's no peer reviewing, whatever. This is also part of the reason why, of course, the YouTube historical quality is an abomination, to say the least, even from those channels that attract more audience, and exactly maybe because of that. I mean, and obviously I would say because of that, of course, if you're not able to understand whether something is reliable or not, the shallower, the less threatening to your fear really is. Right, we'll pass to a cultural judgment on this, because, as you know, I believe that the first denial of Western identity is fear. Right? If you are afraid, if you're scared, it means that your divine standards basically are not met. Right? If you fear because you do not know, the fault is yours for not knowing. Right? And confidence and faith and trust are one of the pillars, of course, of divine power, and without that, right, you cannot ever ascend to higher standards than whatever the masses are up to. You see, this is a statement that people would say, well, that's ideological. You're filling your videos with this kind of stuff, and that actually I do not go there unless I'm talking about, of course, the imperial tradition and religious history, theology, spirituality. That's history as well. And you see, I will be clearer after that in explaining why here ideology is perfectly neutral in itself, because of course I'm personally biased towards that. But if I describe it accurately on a historical level, I'm not, say, creating the history before, altering it for my own purpose and then delivering it to you, hoping for you to believe in it, right? I learned these things studying history, and not because somebody indoctrinated me or I had ever heard these things from anyone else before, right? It was all very easy and natural to get to this point, and actually this, I think, also helped me dramatically in the quality of my work whenever I've done it, right? And yeah, I could relate with that also with you when I will share part of my my curriculum, right? So accuracy. What is accuracy? The quality or state of being correct or precise. In a more technical way, the degree to which the result of a measurement, calculation, or specification conforms to the correct value or standard. Now, this is very important because, as I was saying before, history does not quite have a hard basis on which to stand. Or better, it actually has it, right? It's not... it's even stronger than the one of hard sciences. But again, people may be biased about that because they're convinced, and this has been a traceable historical ideological, philosophical trend. They're convinced that basically if you stick, again, to something that seems simpler, but more founded, and especially just materially based, you have solved your problems as a human being. While what you have done, you have actually done nothing but increasing them. At least if that's what you think at that point you should be satisfied with, right? I'm a great fan of science per se, because it provides you with the tools to facilitate your life that you should, however, still have a theory, like an intellectual dimension to be able to handle, because also you have a moral value on your own that you build, in fact, on the same universal knowledge of the world that, in this sense, blurs any barrier between any field, right? And history being actually part, say, encompassing the entirety of it, even if we treat it today mostly like a sociological endeavor, but actually history has a deeper meaning than that and includes virtually any other discipline, right? And you are just the one who decides by which extent, right? So here we come back to the concept of standard, right? You determine that, and this standard, of course, flows, right? It's something that you can even mathematically bring it to the infinite, and that's basically what we have to cope with. What happens if we bring our historical standards to the infinite, right? Could we make YouTube videos? Well, hopefully at that point we wouldn't have to need to do anything, because we would be God ourselves, and much would have been fixed in the process, rendering this human dimension basically useless. But we are in this valley of tears, and so whenever one, for example, is searching for some historical insight and may click on Google, YouTube, etc., searching for specific content, inserting a keyword, whatever, may come across, of course, some content that, albeit not having on the outer side any specific indicator of reliability, could turn out to be dramatically accurate and useful and purposeful for the person. This is, in other words, what I'm trying to do. Like, this is not to say that my videos must be considered as the top-notch, historically accurate, whatever, because, again, if you compare that to just a paper I write, of course, there is an abyss, right? But this doesn't mean, again, that for YouTube standards, that's actually low. On the contrary, I consider, again, YouTube's average standard appallingly low, and that's also why I'm here to make what I do here. And so I don't understand even what the problem would be, unless, as I said, the problem is not about the accuracy, the problem is about the confidence of the person that uses this. And believe me, it's extremely easy to threaten somebody's intelligence, right? And the person to feel it, right? That's extremely, like, you see, you may be too dumb to understand something, but you're never too dumb to understand that you're dumb, right? And every time you, of course, higher the standards, you will begin to threaten radically, traumatically, and violently the less intelligent. And the less intelligent will always, at that point, try to escape, unless he decided to try to work and to actually make even a good one through even the means that you're providing. It's the same like with science. You're offering some tools in order to help people to figure out things that they should be doing on their own. Hence, the little baby food that you want to be fed, together with parallel political views like socialism and other social parasitism et similia, is actually the first indicator of the moral, cultural, and personal failure of an individual. And that's definitely something that I'm not going to comfort in any way. On the contrary, it will be always harsher, right? And that's part of the reason why I do not, for example, cite all the sources that I would need to in order to make these videos. Because let's be honest, when you write an article, you always decide how much. Like, there is not a minimum or a maximum, right? You can even write, I don't know, for one statement, 3,000 citations. Right? Of course, nobody will ever publish that, because there are standards even that way. You could cite a couple of things. What's the limit for YouTube, for somebody roaming free with his intellect on the basis of decades of historical education? Probably none, right? Unless somebody comes up and says, well, look, you have stolen my intellectual property. I would like you at least to cite me. And that's quite a complicated thing to do, especially when you are actually improvising on the basis of your personal expertise. And of course, you're referring to somebody else's work, which you also randomly, of course, refer to, because, of course, this channel does use sources in case you didn't notice, and explicitates them, especially that's what I'm talking about. And the other 90% of things you say, where, of course, belong to somebody else's expression at some point in history, but they float in your brain even without having the name attached. And you just reconfirmed that through your work, through your studies, what you had to go through in order to come to this point. And so I think it's incredibly nonsensical to pretend some reference just because, again, you cannot afford to be in the same place where the speaker is, right? This is incredibly important. If one doesn't accept this, it's better for him to be out of Schwerpunkt, as there is no room for any pietism, any sort of, again, free gift, whatever. What I do here is enough. Like, of course, I'm asking for your time and your energies in exchange for some reason. Whenever I wanted to tell you to watch anything, which I do not really do, because I'm convinced that just by putting this stuff out there, people will follow and understand that, because if they have, in fact, any of the interest for themselves to be better people, which seems to be an incredibly rare thing nowadays. I mean, the mere concept that there are better people and worse people, apparently, is being erased from our culture. And it's, first of all, a radically anti-scientific, but also, and more importantly, I would say, even though the two things collimate, morally, moral problem, more important problem. And of course, I'm not going to be here for any of that. If this also sounds like ideology, well, I'm sorry for the person who does not have this ideology, right? That will explain what ideology fundamentally is, right? Coming back to the definition of accurate, right? And the first one, the quality or state of being correct or precise. So let's distinguish a bit the two terms, correct and precise. Correct is a term that, because of our, again, pseudo subcultural paranoia, has become also sort of, every time, that I'm a beyond far right wing, right? So I do not, which means also for the people who do not understand this concept, that I'm actually beyond far right wing, meaning that I'm not far right wing. Do you understand that? That's the part, the cool part of that. That apparently nobody gets what I mean with that, and I'm enjoying myself terribly thanks to this, and I will keep doing that, because you see, this is exactly the point I'm making. If you do not get that, you still have a lot of my content to listen to, and not for finding this or this other citation or quote or statement or whatever. It's something that goes beyond even words, right? And it profoundly calls to your intelligence, and it's not something you have a manual to sort out, right? If you wonder why I'm making all these videos as well, it's not just for confusing the situation, it's actually for providing with ever more evidence under everybody's eyes about what I'm talking about, and making the point of why this is not gotten. And that's, again, in part, or say a medium of Schwerpunkt's meaning. But what I was saying is that if somebody says historically correct, like, it sounds very much like politically correct, which is not the case, right? Correct stands for something that basically has an orthodoxy of some kind compared to something else, and that's when it fits the definition of accuracy, because it basically goes for, if there is an accurate historical assessment, well, if you are in line with it, you're fundamentally correct, right? If we have gotten to the point that one specific concept historically is accurate, which doesn't mean, again, it's a monolithic, granitic thing that stays there and cannot be altered. It simply means that our current moral and scientific acquisitions in the field of history brought us to understand something, right? And that's what we are teaching. And that can be always revised without this having anything to do with revisionism, for example. So correct means that. Precise is something beyond accurate. Like accurate is like, this is a term we use also in military history when we talk about, a gun's accuracy or precision. Right? Accuracy means that you're basically able to shoot more or less towards the target. Right? So that you're not, say that this weapon actually works in the first place, and your aim, your brain, your arms, however you operate this. Being precise means to hit, right, the target. And so it is something, of course, much more surgical and definite that highlights the perfection of a judgment in a statement. Right now, being precise, historically precise, I would say we don't use this. Like we say in our field, historically accurate or even historically correct. Historically precise means rather something referred to the method you're employing, meaning that if you, for example, do not cite adequately something, at that point the person may not know exactly what you're referring to, if you're especially referring to something that you have to fish somewhere that people normally do not know. And so in this case, yes, and that's why I'm making the distinction between YouTube and academic peer reviewing, because in the first case, if a person does not get a reference to a concept or doesn't know where to find the basic historiography about this, the basic literature, it is really their problem and you don't owe them anything. In an academic peer reviewing context, well, a person may say the reviewer may even not even notice that you didn't cite specifically, the source, or the sources at the same time that you're expressing this from. The interesting thing about citations is that I'm quite, you see, in this I'm pretty picky. You can argue even precise, because every time I make a statement in my papers, I'm often making the point that what is written in those sources I'm citing must be also elaborated in a way that you understand what is written in there. And so I often say, well, if you look at these sources, they have to be read in this way because this and that, right? And I quote all the sources. There are people who just go by, well, I will randomly quote somebody else's work, and so more or less people will know what I'm talking about without even actually knowing what the sources in which the actual historical evidence in which this is based works like. Now you can do that if, say, I do, for example, I cite myself sometimes, which is not nice because it's presumptuous and arrogant to some degree, especially if you're a newcomer, but you're also the only one in your field that really ever discussed certain things. You must, because you have written a work, it's very, exhaustive, and you want to refer to that. Well, you would do it, bearing in mind that, for example, if you quote an entire work, there is an entire point that is made by the work that you may also call the person to reflect upon. And not necessarily a reviewer has the time to reflect on that. Why? Because he maybe has to make other 10 reviews. And basically decides, just to tell you how history works, that you can skip that. You can do without that. You can be maybe suspicious that you're not so convincing because he has not done his duty. Right? So you understand how that works. So you cannot be in other people's minds and pretending them, first of all, to give you everything. Because largely, like in practice, it's unfeasible. It's so big. It would require such an extensive amount of work that if I were to apply these standards, for example, to my videos, well, I would make one every year. And I probably would still be not satisfactorily, like if I were just to cover everything, not to write like even how I do in my papers, where, say, I spent years studying certain things, and so it does come to the equivalent of that, but at least now I have enough capacity to combine all things in a different manner, because I already know what these things are, and so I can make some points that eventually are a historical judgment, right? Historians are always called to make a judgment, right? Whoever thinks that history is not about the final judgment of the person who has literally known more than anyone else on it, has some problem not just with history, but with actual reality. But that's just like with political correctness, right? Some idiot, but this is actually not so generalized like that, but some idiot has decided again that historians must not judge. How is it possible for anyone not to judge ever, right? To me, people who claim this are usually those who are truly and politically indoctrinated, with prejudicial bias without any actual adherence to evidence, and they are asking for that as a pass for making their stupid ideology, because there are intelligent ideology, stupid ideology pass unnoticed, because they are perfectly aware that their ideas are stupid, right? History has, well, we form these people for researching for years this stuff, and you do not want to even hear their judgment on it? Do you think that the average moron on the street understands that, or can provide a better judgment, even by reading this thing? Do you think that a person who reads a historical works understand the value of that historical work better than a historian, better than the person that has actually written it? Do you know what actually happens behind somebody else's mind when somebody writes an article? But even when he makes a video, like these ones, you have no idea what's that. And that is part of the challenge, but it's big stuff, right? What comes out is a much narrower and contained and willingly contained reduction because of communicational issues. Like, you can't quite, again, express everything you have in your mind. You have to be understandable in terms of communication, because otherwise nobody can even at that point understand you in the first place. So of course you have some duty to be understood, but there is also the other person incapacity at a point, and this is solely based on standards. In other words, we decide who's intelligent, who's stupid, and one can't deny that being the case, even though you can say that this depends on which field, yes, but taking a given idea, subject, topic, whatever, right? That's something you can objectively measure based on at least human average, which is not a great standard, but it's definitely the only one we have. So there are no ways to get around that, right? So precision mostly has to do with that, even pedantic, and I can assure that you see, this is why it amuses me that people ask for sources, because not just because, again, they could easily find it themselves, especially when they're already historically literate, and so at that point I take it as a personal offense, but because I'm here exactly because I am an extremely pedantic historian in my own work. I need every single thing to be sourced. That's something I've always, even before, like even since I was a child, I was never satisfied with somebody else's explanation. It's how I perfectly understand that even on YouTube somebody may not be. But this has nothing to do, again, with the type of accuracy involved. Right? So pedantic is not precise, but at the same time, whenever you say something just by itself, you're specifically already referring to something. So even if you don't cite it, for example, and if the historical insight and depth of your content is evidently telling you that this thing by common sense is not copied, it's not made up, it's not something that a person is, again, reading from somewhere else, unlike, in fact, most channels that are scripted, right, and that kill, of course, in my opinion, the any chance even of making the possibility of making this as a as a dialogue, right? So it's something that you can exchange with somebody else, as opposed to just a pre-cooked product that somebody else has worked. Not even that the voice telling you that actually can't give you any answer. Well, at that point, I think that everybody gets what they deserve, right? And as I said, it's much easier for people not to feel challenged by anyone, and that's why challenging things are normally avoided, but they're also the most rewarding if you actually decide to take control of them, to make sense of them, to really use them. And the only way is to understand that accuracy as well. Now let's pass to the concept of ideology, which is also a bit the point here. That is to say, where does ideology come into play? Right, so I like this definition. At least let's have here two definitions. Ideology as a system of ideas and ideals, especially one which forms the basis of economic or political theory and policy. I do not like particularly this definition because ideologies are surely, this is the sort of more conventional definition of ideology, so the one that basically tends to have a sort of bias or sort of purism or abstractism, and that mostly has to do with politics and the way we handle money, right, or foreign policy or things like that, right? So everything fits the ideology, and in this sense, it is correct for how people consider ideology, but that's not what ideology means in my etymological dictionary, right? To me, of course, ideology has to do with the science of ideas, the study of their origin and nature, right? How is that we actually think this? We must make sense of our ideas by putting them together and therefore forming a logic of ideas. So an ideology, a system that is hopefully coherent, cogent, sensible, intelligent, and that enables you to basically keep your same ideas together. And so the information, whatever you have through your insight, analyzed in that sort of accuracy sorting method, right? Why is ideology necessary? Well, it's self-evident. If you didn't keep ideas together, you wouldn't even think, right? There is always a connection between anything that you keep together, and that is always unique, right? The way you think of something is a sum of an infinite amount of info, because it's infinite even within what we would think of a finite amount of information. That is to say, you can't go back, you can't go in depth and trying to find out more of these ideas or these impressions, right? Making sense of things is particularly important. We live with some knowledge acquired that at some point we do not make sense of in our lives, right? And it seems to me that most people were apparently adverse to ideologies are exactly the ones that, equally as before with reliability, feel threatened with the idea that they have to actually make sense of reality. That reality is not what the average person thinks reality is. Reality is something much more complex and complicated and deep and large. And if you are not using an ideology, at least to a significant degree, it means that actually you haven't many ideas in your brain put together, right? And therefore anti-ideologism, anti-hierarchy, anti-authority, anti-everyone who actually has earned something through merit, capacity, and even maybe with illicit means for our standards, but that, however, others have done nothing to prevent from happening, and that in this case should be, in my opinion, very much considered and analyzed. Right, this story that we should look at the daily life of the average person throughout history is something completely nonsensical up to a couple of centuries ago, because, of course, what the average person does may be important when you multiply it for 1,000, for 1 million, but in itself, it's not that important, right? It's just like gender studies. It's not that we study habitually still in history, women history less, because there is any special ideological preconception about this. Simply, women, in terms of the major historical events, were much less involved, right, than men in the decisional phases, and so that's the reason why we happen to study more those figures and not others, right? The day in which that would be the other way around, we will study that, we would be forced to study that. So in other words, we are here showing what's the difference between an ideology that actually describes reality and an ideology that wants to deny reality, and that unavoidably gets down to something much simpler, that, of course, the dumber person feels more attracted to, because it is essentially not... It's making this person more delusional about the fact that, of course, you must actually need to be able to think big instead of think small. And so the dumber the idea, the less challenging, and the most comforting, and especially the weaker the person will become individually, which is also what did happen throughout history in the process. Of course, there are pros and cons as far as how the ideologies should be handled. Ideologies are not fixed systems. I mean, they can be when, of course, something changes with such a speed that allows you still to catch up with that ideologically. And there are things that, fortunately, do not change in history, especially in a theoretical sense, and that allow you to act within that spectrum in the actual analysis of reality. So, the thinking of how a thought is, of course, functional to our understanding of reality is necessary as much as the ideology that it entails, right? And so if you have been raised with thinking that, I don't know, discriminating, for example, means it's something negative. Discriminating is a neutral term, etymologically speaking. If you think that, again, ideology is a negative term, just know that ideology, etymologically, is a neutral term with many other things. It's just like, think about the at least what political language is being sort of affirmed like this, like feminism is acceptable as an ideology. Masculinism is not acceptable as an ideology, even though they mean exactly the same thing, from just the opposite sides of sex to one, even though it's an ism, and so it's something that is evidently crossing something out, and is specifically, and by definition, linguistically a sexistic ideology. We should pretend that that's a positive thing, while the other is a negative thing. It's just like, I don't know, fortunately, so of the many things that the European Union does not do, like not even does not do right? It does not do is the declaration that actually the abomination of the dignity of mankind represented by National Socialism, fascism, is exactly the same represented by socialism and communism. Actually, you can't quite equate them, but I'll skip this topic for now. But just fortunately, we're getting at least somewhere in terms of recognizing that what an average person thinks is largely irrelevant, and that we must get to the point of the issue, because that's the only way that any person has to do anything positive and to give dignity to humanity that evidently needs that, right? I always say that. Do you know what human means? Human acquires a positive semantics in our world. We are human. We need to be humans. Human means dirty. The etymology of human is extremely negative in the Latin language that it has produced it and that has used it ever since. And up to a couple of centuries ago, human literally meant the abominable product of the foe. And today, of course, we skipped that thing completely because, of course, never mind knowing the language that you speak and what things mean, the etymology, the history, and all. Never mind that, because yes, we do live among, extremely embarrassing, say, circumstances, at least, for not being more specific. And we have to cope with people's ignorance, incompetence, incapacity, weakness, stupidity every single day. And apparently nobody is willing to go harsh enough with the people who largely create this problem. Right? Never mind that, again, up to a couple of 100 years ago, all the world, yes, was falling, but it was towards this direction, but at least was perfectly aware that divides exist between human beings, and that they are forced necessity, right? This thing, now, if proposed, is not just an ideology, as you would like any opinion to be, but it's a negative ideology. It's actually something wrong. It's actually something that you must not say, or that you must hide, right? So I think that what you would say, but what does this have to do with history? Well, this has to do with everything, first of all, and history has to do with everything. But it's what I was saying before. It is to say, all those standards that we're talking about, people not being able to recognize accuracy, not being able to recognize reliability, not being able to actually have an ideology, is the greatest problem to any, again, moral and scientific understanding of reality. So ideology is not just neutral, but it's a necessity, right? And if you're trying to smear whomever by saying, well, but you have an ideology, yes, because if you had actually opened your own dictionary, if you had actually been provided by your parents with a first world primary schooling, you would know what, in your language, the one you actually speak and don't understand, ideology means. And that would have an effect, or ipso facto, in reality, meaning that once you have an ideology, you act upon it. What do you think that faith is? What the concept of fides entailed? And why do you think that people are not religious anymore? They do not believe in God. Do you think it's a problem of, religion being bigotry? What that's even supposed to mean? Where the term comes from. It's just, even there, a distortion of an actual religious group that eventually took on this sort of, by this semantics. But the question is, have you ever even started to think about this? Have you ever started to think why people believed in what exactly? Because the other novel is that, that part of spiritual history has been erased from us, and but even more subverted, right? It's been erased to this point because people truly do not know what religion is, even allegedly religious people. But even more, whenever one wants to search for what that actually means, it is distorted, right? Religion, for example, is presented as some sort of, again, sclerotic preconception that must be at odds with the rest of the world and sort of escalating some sort of irrational behavior. Now, it's true that there are culturally underdeveloped peoples that, of course, use religion like that because they're culturally underdeveloped. That's the other thing that we should resume. When you go outside of the West, it's not that there is another way of thinking. There is not a way of thinking. When you say reality is one, as much actually the truth is one, but also reality is one. The fact that we all think differently is not a positive thing, right? Because it means that for every person who thinks differently from the truth, we all have a problem that must be solved. Naturally, the only way to solve that would be, again, being God ourselves, but if you actually understand what the religion concretely is, and not the religion that you actually been told, even as an actual believer, even suppose that you actually do believe in anything, even when you claim that, it's been hidden from you. It's not been hidden, again, because there is a major conspiracy about that. It's being done under your eyes by the same ideologies that hate humanity, at least the divine spark within humanity, the few that's left in this dirt, and that wants to prevent anyone to rise above, because they're jealous of that, because they cannot afford to understand that there are higher standards. There is a hierarchy, a authority, an order, a reason, and anyone who, of course, wishes to rule the world must be aware of this. That it's also your fault if you fall, because it's always your fault for everything, right? Technically, we are responsible for everything and everyone, and by reciprocally, because our action can save anyone, as much as we can be saved by anyone, except it doesn't seem from a couple of millennia that this is feasible, right? And we've just been encouraged back then to do so, but apparently we have just stopped doing the thing entirely, right? So I think this is important because it explains how ideology not just is a necessity, but how you cannot interpret history and reality outside of an ideology. Having explained what this means, it's just cognitively impossible. Like, it's not something that I say that you can do without. No, unless you are God, you can't, right? But the point, because it's something that we must use, admittedly, in an imperfect way, because our cognitive means are rather poor, and so of course every ideology is being not conferring omniscience, is rigged to some degree. But of course, the more elaborate it is, the more actually objective and accurate it is, based on reality, and the more useful it is, the more important it is. So I think that this is exactly what happened with me. At the beginning of my studies, when I was young, I thought that we should clear all ideology. I wasn't going at history by saying, look, now I actually have an hidden ideology and I want to impose it here. Surely there was something like that in terms even of political extremism when you're young. But there is a voice of reason that tells you, look, here there is something else to understand, right? And so if we at that point are objective and try to reason without bias, we can at least be a bit hypocritical and puritanic to pretend that we have no ideology, but still actually starting to describe reality correctly. Now when you start doing that, and you go on and on and on for decades, then an ideology will automatically form on the basis of that evidence, because chances are that at that point you will have understood how reality works a bit better than somebody else. If you still live in a world in which every person who speaks has some sort of rigged idea, and of course you follow YouTubers that just are clamorously lying and not providing any reliable information, and you think, and you're not actually any better than them, you think that every person can take any mental direction, and there is no way to understand where they're going with that, so that you will be scared and you will fear, but that's actually your failure, right? And so you cannot drag with yourself anyone who actually instead has an ideology that actually works and that spends his time and energies in large quantities, to say the least, to show you that on an actual historical basis. And I built my ideology on historical evidence, not the other way around. You can argue that it can happen in part, but in my case it happened definitely in a... I would say this again, in fact, that I arrived to the point I arrived because, of course, I based myself on first on the evidence and then in the actual interpretation, and finding out that there are some... It's not even a matter of patterns, it's a matter of actual congruence, right? Then congruence will bring to patterns, of course, if you can spot them, provided that you're always aware of the possibility of this having exceptions in the first place. The Clausewitzian theory really helps a lot in showing that double thread, that if you're also not tuned in by default, you can't quite hope to understand reality correctly, right? But one interesting aspect of this is, of course, that, and I think that this is what, of course, also the academic experience shows, because at least you're talking to the people who are more invested. Let's say that they're following in part your same pattern, your same path. They're discovering the same pattern, etc. That you can agree with that sense, accurate vision, and saying, well, here we know what we're talking about because we've been there. And if somebody else doesn't see that, because we know they don't, because every single student has not gotten to the point where you are, is not going to understand that, why should we even care about being reliable? You see, when I went to university, of course, there was a great deal of shock whenever a professor made a mistake, which led you to think that, say, in some ways he was unreliable, unless you actually came to know what they really thought, and so you understood why they would also make a mistake sometimes. A mistake, in my opinion, like, of course, those mistakes, in my opinion, were not forgivable, especially considering the excellency of the places, after all. But it just shows you, to a degree, that what it means to have gotten through an ideology. Because when you are young, you think that what matters is knowing a lot of stuff, but you do not see where you can get mentally when you actually learn that stuff. It's not all stuff scattered on the pavement. It's actually a pile that has a system, has a structure, has a dimension, has a sense, has a purpose, has a logic holding it together. And this logic cannot be touched, right? You cannot, as I said before, convince a person that a content is accurate just because you give them a bibliography. Because the bibliography are works that you must study in order to understand. So if you are given this to some person just because they're paranoid about you not, where finding this information, you're not actually helping this person. Especially when this stuff could easily be found by anyone. If they just bought a book and just had, 200 titles in that bibliography, and from that 40,000, if they were to actually read it, and so if they made the actual effort of learning anything. So the videos I make are obviously directed at spreading the ideology that allows you to understand history. But giving history together with that, not giving, let's say, a list of books that people can read, but reading those books together with those people and explaining them why certain ideas are expressed the way they are, what we can think about it. You can essentially offer a dialectical, theoretical model at the end of the day. The way I organize my videos, for example, has to do with a lot of actual criticism towards the very sources that I use. So I actually don't recommend most of them either. So in fact, I'm quite picky whenever I have to provide with an actual advice, like a source as an advice, because I think that it's also, first of all, again, sources are somehow incomplete. Remember when I said before, like, it takes an awful lot of time just to even write an article or a book or whatever. That can contain everything. And the more you want to say, the more concise you have to be, and so the more work the person who reads that must do in order to understand the work in the interest of quality. So you can love a book about a certain topic, but not necessarily you will be having that book in your hand in order to learn about something. Sometimes we need even just good catalogs, especially historians do, because they can easily pick that information and then elaborating on it. This is basically what I do. If you haven't noticed, like, the structure of my videos depends on, does I have like a sketch of given amount of information, then I build on it, like maybe 2 hours of video, because on the basis of each one of these information, I can associate them to others, each other, just even the one I have in a sketch, but the others I have already covered, etc. How can I, and plus with all my historiography and literature in mind and or used to check this, and how can you even be able to transmit that to the audience, if not spending the time writing an explanation of a bibliography, of pieces of information from a specific bibliography, rather than actually telling the deal and what you actually think as a historian to be the deal through your own ideology. Because who can keep that together the way you do? Nobody does. You wonder how original this content is. That's the degree of it. Right? You can't quite understand it unless you do it, unless you train yourself to handle this this mechanism. Right? It's not immediate. It takes years to actually master, to handle it, but it eventually works. It's just like when you drive a car. At the beginning, it seems like difficult. Eventually, you just drive without even thinking, almost. The same with every exercise, and you can assure that with history it's extremely easy. I feel a bit of pity for people who say, well, you're covering so many topics at a time, how can you be competent in every of them? This is not for me to decide, but again, I have some standards, and if you don't have those standards, because they are actually much lower than mine, not the other way around, well, that's ipso facto the thing, but you're basically declaring that you wouldn't be able to do that. What if somebody else can? Because they've actually done something that is not that difficult to do at all. I would reflect on that if I were one of those people. It's also all very logical, by the way, because if we could simply rely on what the average person thinks, we wouldn't need any hierarchy whatsoever. We wouldn't need an educational system. We wouldn't need people to go through levels of education. And so what is actually happening in universities, according to you? People are learning what? To enormous amount of historical knowledge. Especially in history, it doesn't work like that. We say history is not a craft. You can be trained to cite properly, how to use the historical method. That's one thing, especially when you write something yourself, the thesis, etc. But what actually we select students like is authority. We essentially teach them, just like in the war bands, to go under first, and then to show what they're made of, and then collecting the fruits of that in the end. It is a matter of authority. History gets down to that. University, our educational system is not as imperfect as it is, but it's still as at the core, even civilization, it all worked more or less like this everywhere, every time. It is not much about making people coming out with the same knowledge that the scholars that teach them have. It is designed to render these new scholars fruitful with their own researches, right? And that is up to them. If we pretend that a person simply by reading a book has the same capacity to understand it than a person who has come out of that process, of that test, of that trial, you're immensely wrong. We wouldn't need any form of education, right? So, is history all a matter of authority? I think so, right? Even though I often say anecdotally that coming from a continental European background, I have much more trust in the sources than in the scholars. This does not express a judgment of merit in the single scholar, right? It just expresses the ideal of a scholar that has allegedly seen it all and knows how to judge everything, like it's an omniscient divine God. But if you look at the process of what actually makes, aside from the contingencies, the messed up reviewing system or whatever, the publishing mechanics, even the cost, etc., a good historian, is how much they have actually gone through. Right? This equates empirically also in how much they know, but rather than how much, I would say how well they know, how much they have developed the tools to analyze more complex systems, because of course the more complex the system they have analyzed, so quantitatively, but also the more qualitative knowledge they have of the next, the qualitative would be the analysis, the criticism of the other information they have, right? That's why we go by levels in education, because we must take people to etymologies also here. Education comes from ex ducere in Latin, which means to lead out, right? We must essentially elevate people out of their condition of misery at every step, and being sure in a standardized fashion, an approximate empirical one, that at every step of the way we have gotten them to the point that matters for them to be capable, right? And of course this should be based merely on merit, right? The merit of the teacher as much as the merit of the student, right? Today, of course, the prevalent idea is that we have to integrate. Nobody knows what exactly. We have to be, in other words, passively forced to be tolerant towards something that nobody has even explained us why it's happening, that we do not like, when the only way to make a civilization work is, of course, to reward fierce capacity for what we actually need to do in order to be effective, and not to abide by some subjectivistic and moralistically relative standard that nobody really knows was set for whom, right? Which is a very different thing from a stupid populistic revolution, because it's exactly the lesser people that create the problem. So it doesn't mean like among the lesser educated, the less successful of the conservative side that says, well, so we should do without teaching, without education. No, right? Just like in the past, the elites were the single most brutally and violently educated ones. They studied everything, history, science, in practice, right? They were taught to lead other people, which is something that we should teach in every group, the dynamics of and the function of, in order to be able to replicate, right? And this could bring the entire system up, right? You could always have the guys at the top and at the bottom, but still elevating the overall standards. That would be incredibly easy to do. Like, it's not something that you can achieve metaphysically. If just, I don't know, I think about my school system when I was there. If there had been just a little bit more of harshness in the way, especially grades were given, you could easily, immediately trigger an enormous response out of sheer anxiety from the students that were, of course, pretty lazy, and they could have done much more, right, in a very self-evident way, but were even some of the best people in the Western educational system, so exactly because of that. And simply make the thing happen, right? But if there is no will, there can't be that. Also, in this, is this just ideology? Right? You must accept that there is no historical truth, because there is only truth. If the truth needs an adjective, it's not a truth anymore. It's just somebody else's shortcoming that fixes a standard that maybe even be higher than anyone else, but it's always limited to something that is not the truth, even that lays far under. So what does history do? History is about the actual wisdom deriving from the understanding of reality, right? Knowing how to cope with it for practical purpose. If you do not, this is valid for any cognitive endeavor. Like, if you don't know how to do that, you can't leave. Simply enough, you can't solve problems, can't do anything, right? And this is not, again, a point of arrival. Many people truly believe, just like the ones who ask for bibliography, that there is a point of arrival. They feel the need to anxiously put themselves above those who have achieved, even though they have no merit whatsoever, and they can't even get the thing. Exactly for this reason. Even when they have it, they don't know what to do with that. And their limit is directly proportional to the fixed idea of standard that they have about history. History, instead, is about authority. History is about the guy who pushed himself truly, not because some self-ranking of its own faculty does it for them, right? But literally has truly gone beyond what most people have ever done in a field that he's the best, is the greatest expert in, and that can provide with that wisdom derived from this endeavor. This is it. What else do you want? This is more important, perhaps. This is what I said today is, of course, it's not glamorous, but it's probably among the most important things I've ever said on this channel. Not, again, because it's a I didn't script this. I don't script such ideas. I just start from them because I have them in my mind. Like, if you think that this is some sort of, again, prearranged stuff, I don't know how you watch my videos, where you get them from, what kind of, again, opinion you have about my channel or whatever. But just bear in mind that what I just said, if you arrive to this point, and if you have understood it, which you may have not, because I hardly get anyone getting the thing. Like, again, my ideology is laid out easily in all my videos, but nobody so far has ever actually nailed it. Right? The implications of that, I mean, you can even say that an imperial Catholic traditionalist. But what does that mean exactly? Like, not what even anyone would agree on, or at least even people who are closer to these ideas would agree on. There is always that degree of debate. But the question is, do you actually understand what that implies? Which is a different thing. And that's what you should always look at when you listen to my videos. Then I'm not doing this to entertain you. I'm doing this because I am training my mind just on speaker, so that you can understand what I'm going through. And it's not even anything particularly advanced, at least. My mind works much more when I'm writing something. But I can't transmit that through this means, or at least I could if I just, it would be an incredibly strange and boring video, perhaps, to speak my mind, which I don't do, by the way, so it would be even artificial and natural in that sense when I write something. But this is just for saying what is specifically this channel about. So any discussion about, this channel, I don't know what it is, look, there are other channels that explain sources. If you don't understand what I'm doing, and especially what those channels are not doing, not even remotely, it's useless for you to even pretend that you understand anything about what I do. The same goes for accuracy, right? I've never found anyone here or out of here that is discussing anything in the merit of what I'm talking about. I've never found anyone who was actually getting to the point that I'm getting to, beyond history. But I'm also, every time, again, you see, what's the point? I have the legal authority to correct people on their historical understanding, right? So there is this, again, attitude that gets to, we should try to fuck this guy up because, we have to, for some reason, which I presume is, I won't say what it is, but that there is some complex there, just because, right? There are people who, I don't know, leave doing that. But the question is, do you understand that my entire point is to correct anything you say. Like, you could even provide. I'm not. You see, I haven't made this video because I have found anything recently about in discussions or whatever. I'm just saying this because I feel it from people as a general attitude, even when they do not voice it explicitly. Right? This channel is beyond what you think normally that a history channel on YouTube is. I don't say it because I'm saying, my channel is the best, I'm the smartest, it's just beyond. And you must understand what I mean. It's not easy. It may take, I don't know, watching all of my thousands of videos 10 times. And just telling you it's here. And if you don't get it, I don't mind. Right? But I'm warning you about it. I'm telling you that there is something here. And venturing into ideologies is difficult. But I would say that venturing into an ideology that nobody has been able to sort out, I think, is even funny. Right? At least it is a worthy endeavor to pursue. Right? Naturally, challenges are everywhere. I don't pretend with my channel to reach the extent of people that would be necessarily interested in doing whatever. I'm not asking anyone to do anything. I'm just warning people who want to rate, categorize, frame, picture this channel that if they're not actually listening, and if not actually checking with their own means, if they're not actually working, they're wasting their time. And it's a favor that I'm doing, because I still get the same amount of views, maybe, okay, more or less depending on what I say specifically, but, right, it's something which definitely I can live with, depending on the independently on the outcome. And in general, I think that the amount of videos I've made is enough for stimulating ideas that at some points, yes, people actually came back from and told me, well, look, this is being useful. And maybe that, and understood that, and they understood. Not everything, not all, not, again, my ideology or whatever, but they understood what I'm up here for. And that, I think, is actually the most important part of the story. Right? Because if I manage to instill that in any person, that truly is a time well spent. These years making these videos will have had meaning. Right? And life is strange. I don't talk about my life. There are things going on. They're not easy. But as long as I see this, I'll go on. Right? The time it is really hard. It's really tough sometimes. But I think this, together with also the rest of what I do, like is repaying. That nothing can be without difficulties. Nothing can be. We must suffer in order to achieve something. Life is always about a lot of things that you can't control, but that you can extend your control on indefinitely. If you succeed, things will come back. And we don't have time. That's the worst thing. That we are catching up. But apparently there is one end. Also, is part of the reason why we should reflect on spirituality and religions, because there is a very specific, logical, rational point why the history of religion went the way it did. And it's not the best one, but it's something that we, at least as an outcome currently, but it's something that at least we have a clear picture of whenever we studied, and so that we can understand that that was contemplated by the same religion at some point, that this would happen. And we have to go with that. Imagine, just to remind you how everything is much later than you think, all the sins of all your ancestors that you don't even know, and that's why you wonder why things happen to you, are weighing on you. And you have the capacity to withstand that assault from the forces of evil all around you. And just think that your life is about this. And it is about what you can do in order to try to reverse the situation, to fix that. But this works for you, works for your family, works for other people, works for the whole world. It doesn't end here. It never does. So that's also why we're doing this here. For which perhaps I will inform you at some other point, regarding also the struggles and why these things happen, etc. But there is something that goes beyond words, so it's not just that. So in order just to come back on Earth a little bit, I'll say my usual thing, and that is for today. Stop it here. Of course, we will keep talking about this. Hopefully, I never know how things really go. But for today, I stop it here. I just hope that you enjoyed this video. If you did, please share it. Otherwise, leave a like or subscribe to my channel if you're interested in my upcoming content. As always, I thank you heartily for listening to me. I wish you a nice time and see you next time. Bye.